it always kind of helps to know what I'm going to talk about beforehand, but even when I think I know what I'm going to talk about, I never quite know what's going to come out of my mouth. So what I hope to do is perhaps put weapons of mass destruction in a more political and historical context, as I understand it. But to do that, I have to describe a little bit about my own journey, about how I, when I had my shaking awakening in a village in Vietnam in April 11th or 12th, 1969, I've been on a long journey of trying to understand what I was doing and why I was doing it, even though culturally I understood the more superficial reasons. So I basically had, after I got out of the military, I did kind of a history of the human condition post-Ice Age. I know that sounds a little strange, but after all, we're the product of several million years of evolutionary biology. And the memories are in our tissues and in our cells, and often I discovered that I had no memory of my autonomy as a real human being. I only knew what I had been taught and therefore brainwashed from the time I was born in 1941, which I discovered was, most of my brainwashing was pretty insane. And I want to have a lot of time today for discussion with you all. So I want to make some initial remarks before I get into the discussions with you all, because usually the discussions provoke me even more, and you. One thing, I laid out an outline of history, discovering that most of us, or all of us really, but again I was focusing on my own journey. The question I was asking that's led to my memoirs, which aren't published yet, is how was it so easy for a kid like me growing up in a small town in upstate New York, active in my church, a Boy Scout, on the National Honor Society, treasurer of our student council, an all-conference athlete in my senior year, and then going on to college and continuing to be a good young man. How was it so easy for me to have followed an order of a man to go 10,000 miles away from my home to participate in destroying other people? Now, that's pretty astounding. It happens all the time, and it's been happening for 6,000 or 7,000 years or so. But it's still astounding to me because I wanted to know what happened to my soul. There was something wrong with this explanation. Well, you were serving your country, and that's what you do. The law says I had to go. Well, maybe that is what the law says. I don't know, but my life as an evolutionary being goes back millions of years. So what is this new idea of obeying somebody to do something that's really insane? And that's the question that has motivated my memoirs. And by the way, even though they've been rejected by 20 publishers, I have a prototype here of my book, and I have on the back I have a picture of me as a commander in Vietnam, and it's like I was just mentioning this to somebody in the parking lot before I came in here. Like, I can't believe that's me. It's like, I can't believe it. You know, it's like, could that possibly be me? And I have quite a lot of photos from Vietnam. It's like, I just happened to put this one on the cover, and it's just, it is kind of it's still hard for me to grasp it. So I think we are in maybe the 5th or 6th or 7th blip, what I call blip in modern history. The first blip was, when I say blip, I mean that blips that have taken us as a long evolutionary species out of a sense of autonomy in small groups and thrust us into a position where we're living outside what is normal and healthy for us as people. So what I think is the first blip is that came after the agricultural revolution, and I'll be brief in this, but I think these blips all shaped us. After the agricultural revolution produced surplus, surplus led to empires. And empires led to what we call civilization. And civilization basically are vertical power structures that require lots of workers, call them slaves, in strata. You are in some class structure, the majority being at the base, the large numbers that are the workers, and then there were the scribes, and not the Pharisees, the scribes and the priests and the astronomers. So that is a major blip, 300 generations or so, where we have been living in a class structure and requiring our obedience to somebody above us in order to be free of ostracization, free of imprisonment, or free of death, early death. And then we have, since 1500, we have the history of Eurocentric colonialization, where 20% of the population of the world basically plundered the other 80%. And of course, the 20%, which was the European countries at the time, the plunder was only distributed to their own oligarchy. It wasn't distributed among the people of Europe. And then we had another blip. René Descartes developed kind of a way of thinking. It was very mechanistic and very right angle, the opposite of holistic thinking, reductionist thinking. And basically, Cartesian thinking has dominated all Western societies for 400 years. It dominates our language, it dominates the way we think, it dominates the way we define values. It's very rigid, very mechanistic. And then we had the Industrial Revolution, which really speeded everything up and increased the amount of misery, actually, while some people were getting wealthy. But that theme is pretty similar for 6,000 years, a few people getting wealthy at the behest of, on the backs of the majority of people. And then we have the petroleum revolution, 150 years now, where we had this material that took, I don't know how many millions of years, 80 million years or 200 million years to form under the surface of the Earth. And then in 150 years, we've taken half of it out and put it in the air and in the water, which has enabled all of us to do what we generally do with our lives. It's totally unsustainable, but we haven't been able to think that through clearly because we were born and raised in it. We didn't have that historical perspective. And then we've had, post-World War II, we had a very short period where there was a predominant middle class. Most of us in this room probably were very shaped by middle class values. Middle class, when I say the middle class, I mean really that was a large number of people that were in the middle class post-World War II, much different than all previous periods in our history. And so consumption became an extremely important value in the middle class blip. And now since the fall of the Berlin Wall, we've had this total global Pax Americana, which was just following on several decades of moving in that same direction, really since 1900. So these are blips in history that have really shaped our thought structure, have shaped our basic willingness to obey in a vertical structure. We don't even think about it. You learn to adapt. You learn to adapt in order to get along. Well, what happened to me in Vietnam, in this village, was that I had an extra duty. It was nothing I knew that I was going to be doing. And I was, by the way, I had been in law school when I was drafted, and I was a chicken hawk, so I admit that I believed in killing commies for Jesus, but I just didn't want to be part of it. I wanted other people to be part of it. And ironically, I was drafted due to a loophole in the school deferment law. I had a 2S school deferment in 1966. This was pre-lottery. I did not know there was a loophole in the deferment law. So I went home, met with the Selective Service Board, and they explained the loophole. I said, okay. So they actually deferred my induction for 3 months to enable me to finish my semester, my 4th semester of law school, and I enlisted in the Air Force in a 4-year program, thinking I was going to have an easier assignment. And in fact, the first 2 years, I was an officer at Headquarters Air Force in Washington. It was a very plush white-collar job. I thought, well, this is pretty good so far. But then I got orders to be part of an experimental Air Force Ranger unit, which I didn't even know existed in the Air Force. And I was sent to Fort Campbell, Kentucky for 12 weeks of Ranger training. And I thought, how did this all happen? How am I in this position? I did everything to avoid being in this situation. And I thought I was smart enough to avoid those situations. But learning, of course, that life has its own journey, and I needed to join the journey and understand the journey. But in that Ranger training, something happened in January of '69. And again, I was 6'3", 215 pounds, always a good athlete. Physical stuff never bothered me. When we had to do the bayonet training, which was after the firearms training, I already had my marksman's badge or medal by that time, shooting at silhouettes. And I didn't like it that much, but I did it. But then when it came to the bayonet training, I didn't feel real comfortable plunging the bayonet into the dummy and screaming kill 100 times. That was what we had to do. I guess that's normal. That's a routine thing. But I was in the Air Force, so it was certainly new to me. My brain certainly said, just do it, Brian. You know, don't get in trouble. Just do it. But my arms that had to do the thrusting were not cooperating. And I thought, well, certainly in 5 or 10 seconds, I'll be able to align my habit to obey orders, to obey my vertical authority figures, and my arms will start thrusting. Well, about 15 seconds later, I was still trying to psych myself up to do it, and I wasn't able at that point to do it. And the sergeant who was training us, I was with 21 officers. They were all doing it. And he was so angry with me that he came up and shouted in my ear, and he bumped me like a player and an umpire going at it. And I lost my balance and fell down on the ground because I was so nervous and, you know, emotionally kind of shaky at that moment. And I said, well, I'm not doing it. I'm just not going to do this exercise. And I never did the bayonet exercise. I got in trouble with my superiors. They threatened me with 5 years at Leavenworth for failing to comply with an order. And I didn't have the wherewithal at that point to refuse deployment, even though I hadn't done the bayonet exercise. So jump ahead to April 11th or 12th, 1969. I was in Vietnam with 43 men protecting air bases, protecting the planes so they could do their bombings. And the Vietnamese colonel, who was the commander of our little base in the Delta, asked me to do a special favor, which wanted me to go with a Vietnamese lieutenant and document the success of airstrikes. Because he had heard, we had a CIA torture center about 5 miles from our base, and he heard that in the latest torture sessions, some of the new pilots that had just come to Ben Thuy, where I was, from Louisiana, where they'd just been trained as pilots, some of them were VC infiltrators and were planning to sabotage bombing missions. And there had been a few examples before that of pilots flying off to Cambodia rather than flying in their missions. Oh, well, I thought it was a little strange, but I wasn't thinking yet what a target was. And so the Vietnamese lieutenant in my Jeep guided me to this place. It was only like 5 miles from Ben Thuy, but across this big river. And we walked, he said, stop the Jeep here. There was a lot of smoke. And the first target was a village. It was a fishing village. And all I saw were bodies and bodies and bodies and bodies and bodies, and I could hear them moaning, the people that were still alive. And I could smell the burning flesh. And I could smell the lingering napalm and the chemical residue from the bombs. And I thought, this must be a mistake. And I couldn't, I was actually kind of in shock. And I was actually attempting to walk a little bit into the village to kind of size it all up. And I couldn't walk any further because there was a woman at my feet with had been holding 3 children when she got hit. And her eyes were open. And I thought, I mean, maybe she's alive, I don't know. I was kind of in a psychic shock. And I bent over to look at her more carefully, and I started crying and I started throwing up. And the Vietnamese lieutenant, who was standing about 3 feet to my right, witnessing the same scene, said, "What's your problem, Lieutenant?" And I didn't really know this lieutenant. He was just assigned to be with me that day. His nickname was Bo, and he spoke perfectly good English. He had been educated in both France and the United States. His family had all been collaborators with the French. I said, "I'm looking at my family." That came out of my mouth. And I don't know where that came from. I mean, it came from an archetype. It came from a very ancient place. And that was the first time I really had a sense that there was this, wow, there's a deep place here. My arms knew it in the bayonet training. My arms had what I think, I call it body wisdom, but an archetypal memory that is into empathy and into cooperation, into mutual respect, which my brain didn't know anything about, of course, because I'd been educated in modern Western cultural traditions and language. And so I had no frame of reference cognitively. So the frame of reference was in my body. That's what and I've had to study lots of psychology, lots of anthropology, lots of evolutionary biology to understand these things. So from that point, and by the way, the lieutenant laughed, because to him, we were looking at communists, and half the bodies were that long. And it was an undefended fishing village. There was no anti-aircraft weapons. There were no AK-47s that I could see any place on the ground. So it was, I was like, this must be a mistake. Well, in a 6-day period, I had to do that 4 more times. And in the same general area of Vinlong province. And somewhere around, I think in that week, I saw 700 to 900 bodies. And they were all villagers. And I knew I was on the wrong side. If I wasn't a Buddhist. I was, by that time, I wasn't even a Christian. I was just trying to figure out life. And, but I knew something was really, really wrong with the way I had been educated and the way I had been acculturated in the world. And so that started my journey. That's still happening to this day. Knowing that almost probably everything I've learned and all the assumptions that I've have been living on, and many that I still don't even know yet, are probably fallacious. They probably aren't true. So that means, okay, the journey is wide open. Start learning, start listening, start talking to people, start meditating, start clearing the brain out of all that bullshit that's up there, and let some other wisdom come in. And so then, throughout the 70s and 80s, I was processing all this. I had read Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, 1970 and 74, which had a big impact on my life, about lifestyle and right livelihood. And it started me studying sustainability and sustainability principles. And it led me to think that perhaps one of the most violent forces on the planet is the Western way of life and the American way of life. Maybe more violent than the weapons we even produce, because our way of life is producing incredible amounts of misery for 80% of the world's population, and we have to maintain our control. Maintaining control of the story is very important. The story, of course, is a lie, so maintaining the lie is extremely important. And because we have been obedient for 300 generations or whatever, for the most part, more or less, there's very few people that have provided us examples for being disobedient, and we have some, and there's some of them are in this room. But for the most part, we're still living in a way that requires exploitation of other people. And driving cars, which I used to have a Corvette. I drove all over the country with my Corvette Stingray. Before that, I had a '56 Chevy. We may be killing ourselves with car pollution while we've been fighting to stop nuclear weapons. And in my case, all my personal experiences are with conventional weapons. Chemical poisoning, cluster bombs, white phosphorus bombs, now depleted uranium, which I haven't been exposed to, at least in a war zone. All these insane uses of the human creative energy in order to maintain control of basically a story of the world that enhances a small percentage of the people materially and the middle class, what's left of it, but at the expense of millions of people and the earth. It's like we're a bunch of lemmings, as you've heard, racing to the cliff. And so my interest is in reclaiming human consciousness that's autonomous, because that's our natural, that is our organic, natural, evolutionary place. We are not designed to be following orders. We are not designed to have authority figures above us or submissive people below us. That is not natural. It is not normal, and it's certainly not healthy. So this is, and by the way, also in my studying of post-Ice Age history, since we've had civilization, which is somewhere around 5,000 to 6,000 years, according to the political scientists, that's developed the concept of civilization, the word, that is, not the concept, but the word. We've had somewhere around 14 to 15,000 wars with substantial casualties in this 5,500-year period. And since 1500, we've had at least 3,000 wars with substantial casualties, and about 250 to 300,000 serious battles that might be short of what we call war. This is all stuff that I get from reading James Hillman and various historians that have been trying to establish this pattern of human violence that seemed to emerge with civilization, because civilization was about control. Controlling land, controlling grain, controlling people so they could build the irrigation systems, they could build the grain silos, and that meant needing more labor, so you had to keep going out more to capture more people, and the people had to obey or be killed. And so I think that we're at the point in history now where continued obedience to a consumer culture and the political economic structures that are designed to preserve a consumer culture, such as we have in the United States, and basically all Western societies are oligarchic, and they only can survive with the consent and obedience of the people. Those structures cannot continue without our cooperation. Our money, our purchases of their goods, our investing in their banks, our voting, we legitimize them. And so I think we're at this incredible opportunity in history, at the point that we know that we have cooked ourselves in a terrible bind, almost to the point of omnicide. There's an incredible opportunity to step back and regroup. And regrouping means listening to nature, being quiet and still at times, stopping the frenetic race to do whatever we've been doing to survive, even though it's been maybe very hard. It's very hard because we're not being ourselves. We've fit ourselves into a position that isn't natural. And I just think this is an incredible opportunity for us to reassess. I did not come into the world in 1941 to follow an order to go 10,000 miles away to kill people. That's just not what I came in the world. And I don't think anybody did. But that's certainly the realization that I got. And I think I'm kind of normal. You know, when I was 23 years old in law school, I thought the United States was the greatest country in the history of the world, endowed by God to bring Christianity to the heathen and prosperity to the savages. It's a great story. Why would I want to question it? Well, I wasn't, in some way I wasn't going to be allowed to question it for whatever reason. Circumstances intervened. So we've been living in a social myth that the United States is a democratic nation committed to justice. But the social secret is it's always been an oligarchy committed to exploitation to benefit a few. And I think the fact that we keep believing in our system keeps us from revolting, or keeps us from being revolutionary, or keeps us from being more disobedient. We believe it because we're used to it. Our lives we have become addicted to a certain way of life which is not sustainable, and it's extremely destructive to the planet and to the people of the planet. And every weapon we develop, whether it's a trident, which is, you know, an incredibly destructive weapon, we haven't learned yet that every weapon is a boomerang. Everything we do is going to come back. And I think my arms knew in ranger training that if I plunged that bayonet, my head didn't know it, but I think my body wisdom knew that sooner or later the toxic energy that went into that plunge would return. And therefore, you wouldn't do it. It would be stupid. It would be against my interest. And so I think, again, we're at this point in history of recognizing who are the real savages, that maybe our way of life is the most violent force on the planet because it's devouring everything to sustain it. And of course, it's not sustainable. And we're all in it. So we're all part of the solution to varying degrees, and we're all part of the problem. So it's in each of us. Each of us is a revolutionary in the making. And I like to think that from my cycling, which I've now hand cycled 50,000 miles in 12 years, which has replaced most of my driving, every rotation of my wheel carries me 6 feet. So every rotation is a revolution. And when I cycled from Eugene to Seattle in 2006, 480,000 revolutions actually created a new form of transportation, moving from a car that burns fossil fuels to a bicycle that, at least in general, doesn't burn fossil fuels. We have to eat, and so the fuel is the food we eat, and the question is whether that food is local and sustainable. So you just keep moving with a train of thought, and sooner or later you'll get to a sustainable life. Maybe we'll become hunter-gatherers in a bioregion. I don't know. But the question is whether we want to live or whether we want to just continue business as usual. No, we're going over the cliff, and I'm kind of interested in continuing. So it requires a whole lot of shifts in looking at all my habits. And, sitting on the tracks was not a big deal to me, because I wasn't anticipating being run over. But what was a big deal to me was all the visits I spent in the war zones and seeing all these people who were being shot, maimed, blown up with our weapons. And of course, I wanted to be with them, not with Congress or the president. I mean, I would come back and lobby. And by the way, in the 70s, I was a lobbyist for 4 years in D.C., so I really knew the process of lobbying, walking the halls of Congress, and knowing how a bill really becomes a law, which was a great experience. But all those experiences of being with people who are moaning, and our president and the Congress and many people of our country have never heard the moaning. They haven't heard the moaning. If you hear the moaning, you won't keep doing what you're doing. You can't send a drone into Pakistan. You can't order a drone into Pakistan. You can't be a lieutenant or captain sitting at a computer screen directing a drone into Pakistan if you've heard the moaning. But of course, the whole point is we're not going to hear the moaning. That's the whole point. And so maybe there's ways that we can facilitate to hear the moaning, but it's probably going to be our moaning that we wind up hearing that maybe changes our life. I don't know what that's going to mean, but some of this stuff that we're creating, I mean, Agent Orange, directed at the vermin in Vietnam, is in the veins of Vietnam veterans, and it's in the veins of fourth generation of Vietnamese who are not the original targets. I mean, this is insanity. Of course, you all know that. This is total insanity. Everything we're doing is insane, but it's to maintain the lie that we're an exceptional society, that we're a good society. It's the lie, it's the fantasy, it's the Disney world that we've all grown up in, and to varying degrees are still participating in ways that are not helpful to the future of the planet, including myself. So it's a real challenge to regroup, to rediscover our autonomous selves, our real selves that are wired socially. Empathy is indispensable for human survival. It's as indispensable as food, air, and water. And it's in us. It doesn't have to be anything we go purchase. It's already present in our DNA. It's already in our tissues. So it's a moment, and who knows what's going to happen. There's likely to be a die-off because it's a correction mechanism that we've overpopulated ourselves at the expense of the earth and at the expense of ourselves. So we're all facing, we know, pretty incredible correction mechanisms. And the question is whether our consciousness is going to be cooperating in kind of a zeitgeist of rediscovery of who we really are, or whether we just stay addicted. And because I used to be a director of an outreach center, a veterans outreach center, I had to deal with a lot of addictions. And the vets that survived had to go through an arduous process if they wanted to overcome their addiction. Very arduous. Most of them didn't make it. And while I was director of the outreach center, 12 of them committed suicide. You know, this is tough. Breaking addictions is tough. And consumerism is an addiction. And even the doctors and psychiatrists that are studying the dopamine in the brain, seeing what happens when you go shop, it's the same pattern as when you're addicted to drugs, or what happens in the dopamine. So we're talking about radical shifts in the way we think and the way we make choices, totally in our capacity to do so. The question is how much we really want to do it and whether we have enough collective adrenaline that can make it kind of an almost explode into consciousness. Like, yeah, we're going to have a lot of potlucks now from food grown within 10 miles of our house, and we're going to do a lot more cycling. Whatever it is, it's a process of extricating ourselves from these habits that are very destructive. I'm going to stop there and hope that you all now can contribute to the conversation with your own comments, questions, whatever. Everybody hear the question? I haven't, I mean, there's probably people in the room that have been actively going to recruiting offices now. I haven't been at a recruiting office for many years. I used to be at recruiting offices all the time, counter-recruiting, or some call it truth in advertising or whatever. And I used to go into schools all the time, and sometimes I actually debated recruiters if they agreed to come into the classroom. But there certainly are people that are working on counter-recruiting or trying to reduce the number of people that are feeling vulnerable enough in the economy to join the military. I noticed that there was a headline yesterday that said the economic downturn is making the suburbs a recruiting haven for the military.
I'm fairly new, I mean, in terms of years, to the ideas that you're talking about of changing how we live and that kind of thing. It might be a tad self-revealing to say that I'm totally resentful at having to change my entire life in order to fit in properly, in the way that I understand it should be done. I was raised in this culture you speak of, and it was comfortable and nice and a warm blanket and all that stuff to me because it all made sense at the time. Now that I'm looking at the fact that most of my lifestyle is actually deleterious to me and to the people around me, and having to start evaluating and making those changes, I have found a tremendous resentment within myself that why am I the guy who has to do this?
You don't have to do it.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean, the changes that I feel are necessary for my life. But it's just really, it's been a factor kind of in how I've approached all this, is to recognize that I am comfortable. I find ease in that system, and I have to change. And you know, I don't know about you, but when I let go of something, it's usually got fingernail marks in it. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to bring up that I think that that is a big part of why a lot of people don't just go for it, is that they're like, well, why me? Why do I have to do this?
Well, again, you don't have to do it, and it's your choice.
Yeah.
I have no idea what people are going to do.
Yeah.
You know, it looks, you know, if, just from the empirical evidence, it appears that we're all going over the cliff. But I do also know that radical shifts in history, not just human history, but geological history, they tend to happen quickly when all the preconditions have been working to a certain point. And now we have the biofeedback loops that show what's happening with the climate change. And there's about 12 major ones that are all headed in the same place, which is, you know, dramatic increase in temperatures and so forth. But yeah, and life is a journey, and we do have to deal with our feelings. We do have to embrace our feelings, not say that they're irrelevant. They are totally relevant, including resentment. And but most of the people will bury the feeling, so you don't have to deal with it, and then it'll just fester in some other way. So I encourage people to allow themselves to feel all kinds of things, because this is a very incredible moment in human history that is intense, and in the shift, there's going to be lots of explosions in our body, visceral explosions in our body, and lots of falling down and getting back up again. But that's the way life is. I mean, I've been staggering for 40 years. I'm still staggering on this journey. But I'll tell you what happened in that village when I saw that woman's eyes and saw her as basically me or my family. It gave me, in the horrible trauma of the moment, it gave me a vision of a life where everything's connected. Yes. And that has stayed with me. In fact, I have given that woman a name. Her name is Miley, because I think of her all the time. And sometimes I say, okay, Miley, what now? And I try to listen. Back there.
In my marrow, I feel the same thing, that there is this opportunity for change. The sadness is I don't see young people, because we have fallen many times and picked ourselves up, and sometimes you go to a line and everybody's looking so sad. We're still here again, nothing's changed. And I feel that. And I just want to give you one example. We were in Chehalis, which is very military, sort of right wing. We're climbing up this hill, and here's this lady with this big American flag, and she says, "You guys are so hot out there, why don't you come in and get some water?" And she gave us water, not thinking who we were, what sign we had. We were just sweaty and hot. And I took some pictures of the flag, and the Namyo didn't get killed. So there's this conversion that is happening. Just my only thing is that we who have fallen down and picked ourselves up are still struggling. I don't see the young people that I would like to see here, because we're going to just continue to move on somewhere else. Where are the young people? Thank you.
Thank you. We live in Portland, and we certainly, I have noted that in Portland there's a under the radar movement I would call the horizontal revolution. Actually, Paul Hawken wrote a book called Blessed Unrest, a fairly recent book. Some of you may have read it. He identifies about 2 million examples all over the world of people emerging at the grassroots to become self-sufficient out of necessity, no longer being dependent upon centralized supply systems, whether it's electricity or fertilizer or water. So there is a movement, and in Portland, the horizontal movement is very much made up of a lot of young people, but I'm sure they're a minority, a small minority of young people, but they're definitely leading the way in converting lawns to edible landscapes, from cars to cycling, community currency. I mean, there are ideas percolating out of necessity that we know we can't keep dependent upon. All the centralized systems we've been used to are going to collapse. They're all based on cheap petroleum. And so I think people are sensing it. And who knows in the shift how that sensing it, it's a shock. It's like you have to go through all kinds of processes of struggling within yourself. So I don't know how it's going to turn out. Obviously, I don't have any idea, but I do know that we are capable of making radical shifts.
Supposing we work hard to be more sustainable and to consume less and to eat less meat, use less fuel. Supposing that leaves more fuel and more resources for the people who have powerful appetites, and thereby they have more fuel and they generate more engines and more wars and more conflict. Don't we have to go across the street at some point and stop them from doing that? And if so, how do we do it?
Well, that's of course a classic question. First of all, I would say for some people to want to do what the kings have been doing for 6,000 years requires our cooperation. They can't do it without other people agreeing to cooperate with them. Now, so far, people generally cooperate. But I would not say, and by the way, Gandhi's two-pronged approach was basically you resist and non-cooperate with imperial structures while you're building the constructive alternative at the village level and self-sufficiency. That was so you go across the street and you certainly, you want to dialogue, but you may want to sit in front of their gate. That's fine. I mean, there's going to be all kinds of strategies. What I've discovered is, for myself, only for myself, is that I try to avoid being in a situation where I'm escalating a war mentality. And I'm not very, I think it's so easy to get into war with the cognitive thought structure, like you're going to try to convince somebody to do something different. And I have discovered I'm not good at it. So, and I'm also not very Zen, so it's easy for me to start getting to the point where I want to, I'm a lawyer by training, so I want to advocate with arguments. But I no longer, for me, believe that's a tactic or a method that I want to use. I might sit there. Actually, it's what I was doing on September 1st, 87. I was just sitting there. So I think that people can debate how they're going to deal with the power structure, but I just think the power structure, we need to understand that all power structures can only survive with our obedience. And our power is disengaging from being in that cooperative model. Basically, it's a withdrawal model. It's withdraw our support and refocus our energy with our neighbors. That's basic.
Neighbors to come along.
Well,
because they're so sucked into the story.
I know. There's a question here. I don't have any magic answers for it.
I have been a frontline mom for almost 30 years. I was part of the Back to the Land movement, and I was taken by the nonviolence and the organic planet and simple living, which I've lived as a frontline mom. And when the elders at Big Mountain asked for non-Indians to be human rights observers, it was the maligned hippies who showed up and knew how to haul water and chop wood. They were racist, but they were devoted. And because I have mixed race children as well, who were called niggers by hippies, I started to really try and do everything I could to learn about not being racist. And the things you're saying, I have been resisting authority since I was born. I had a
That's
violent
because you're
drug
natural.
addict, an alcoholic father, and I was molested by a woman who went on to become a nun. Needless to say, I'm a recovering racist and a recovering Catholic. I'm a land-based hippie, and I was driven out of the mountains recently as 2.5 years ago with my child because nigger was spray painted on our school. I lived among people who were growing their own food. I did not even have an outhouse, I had an outpool, living as simple as I could. But there was not a support system there. There were no Indians living around. They were on the reservation. The black people leave shortly because of this race in Stevens County, where white supremacists have gone to kill people of color elsewhere. So now we're on Vashon. I cannot live that simple way because it's too small, it's too illegal. One of the things that have occurred in this country is the marginalization of simple people. There are a lot of young people that are trying to be self-sufficient. Everything you're talking about is so inspiring to so many young people, but they are so maligned, discouraged, called gutter punks and all kinds of terrible things. And they are among the most courageous people, and they're the ones right now herding sheep at Big Mountain and chopping wood and hauling water and really understanding what racism is about along the border with the Zapatistas. I think the Zapatista call for the communities of the world to live communities of resistance is really important. And we need to find out how to do that and be more inclusive. Because I feel like a misfit no matter where I go because my life is so extreme and I've lived poverty for so long. But that's taught me to do without to an extreme. And we have to really make those choices quickly and build trust among the people we love so we can succeed.
One of the problems is that money replaced community. And I grew up with the Amish all around me. And when their barns would be hit by lightning and burned down, a new barn would be built in 1 week without electricity. There would probably be 200 Amish carpenters and 200 Amish women cooking, and these huge tables where they were constantly feeding the workers. It's true. We haven't had community really for many generations. We have less community now, or in the post-World War II period. But it is true. We really can't do any of this stuff by ourselves. We're wired socially, so we need to be doing it in community. And myself, I'm struggling with how to interact with my own neighbors in Portland, and it's kind of slowly we're getting to know them. And I just met a guy the other day who walked by, and he was admiring my electric truck, which is parked in the driveway, and it says electric truck on it. And I noticed that he looked about Vietnam age, and I asked him, what were you doing during the Vietnam War? I just blurted it out, and he said, wow, interesting you'd ask. He says, I've been living here 26 years, I've never told anybody about my Vietnam experience. And turns out he was a resistor and went to Canada. And then he was brought back by the FBI and had to do time. And he said, none of my neighbors know this, but I had told him that I was in Vietnam in '69, and I'm always interested in networking with people who had experienced that. And so we become good friends, and he just lives around the corner. I don't know, because I cycle, I meet people all the time at stop signs. And I don't have I have no walls around me, so I'm just kind of, and I'm with hundreds of cyclists every day, and in Portland now they're having these days where they block off all the streets in certain areas, and there's 20,000 cyclists. And so that's pretty exciting. I don't know, I don't have any great solutions. I'm just trying to unravel my own. I'm a recovering white male, so my own process is I'm learning about.
White American male. Oh, that's even worse.
We have time for
about 2 more questions.
Yeah, Brian, I wanted to take off on your story about the bayonet. You know, I've been working for the last 5.5 years with Iraq war resistors who are at City Sanctuary in Canada. And it's amazing how many of them have told me that they started thinking seriously and started turning themselves around as a result of the bayonet training. And I'm thinking that, you know, the bayonet training is, when you think about it, I mean, there are certain situations where soldiers get into hand-to-hand combat and they might use the bayonet. But I think that the training is really more, it's more about conditioning people to
Absolutely.
get ready to kill.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people just spontaneously resist.
Because they're finding their natural self.
Truth for them. So I think it's important. And by the way, Jeremy Hintzman, the first U.S. Iraq war resistor to show up in Canada in January 2004, he became a conscientious objector after the bayonet training, and he and his wife and Vietnamese wife and 2 young children are on the verge of deportation from Canada. There's an African-American resistor, Rodney Watson in Vancouver, who may be deported tomorrow. Even though there's majority support for the resistors in Canada, and from the people in the parliament, they have a right-wing prime minister who's been deporting people and sending them who end up going to prison in the U.S. So I think it's really important that we all support these young resistors.
I want people in the room to know that Jerry Condon was with me when I got hit by the train, and he was one of about 40 witnesses, but he was one of the vets there, and he's was an ex-Green Beret medic, and he and my wife were the 2 people that were working feverishly to stop the bleeding in my legs. Jerry was there. Thank you, Jerry, for helping me be alive.
Emotionally, it was more like being at a birth. And it was like a miraculous occasion. First of all, Brian survived that. But it also ended up being very empowering experience for Brian and others.
Thank you, Brian.